Hello, everyone, and welcome to NAU Theater's Story Hour. My name is Miss Kathleen, and I am going to be your host today. This is broadcast 12, and we are reading chapter books. So I want to remind you that all of our books are in public domain, and you can find them online for free, or you could go to the library where you could check out a book for free. So we're going to get started. Enjoy broadcast 12. Our chapter books today include The Merry Adventures of Robin Hood, White Fang, A Modern Cinderella or A Little Old Shoe, The Five Little Peppers and How They Grew, and The Story of Dr. Dolittle. Next up is The Merry Adventures of Robin Hood.
Hi guys, so we're continuing with The Merry Adventures of Robin Hood, and today we are starting the chapter, Robin Hood Turns Butcher, and last time we saw the sheriff and his men catch and almost hang Will Stuteley, but the merry men were able to rescue him. Now, after all these things had happened, and it became known to Robin Hood how the sheriff had tried 3 times to make him captive, he said to himself, "If I have the chance, I shall make our worshipful sheriff pay right well for which he hath done to me. Maybe I bring him into Sherwood Forest and have him to a right merry feast with us." For when Robin Hood caught a baron or a squire, or a fat abbot or bishop, he brought them into the greenwood tree and feasted them before he lightened their purses. But in the meantime, Robin Hood and his band lived quietly in Sherwood Forest, without showing their faces abroad. For Robin knew that it would not be wise for him to be seen in the neighborhood of Nottingham, those in authority being very wroth with him. But though they did not go abroad, they lived a merry life within the woodlands, spending the days in shooting at garlands hung upon a willow wand at the end of the glade, the leafy aisles ringing with merry jests and laughter, for whoever missed the garland was given a sound buffet, which, if delivered by Little John, never failed to topple over the unfortunate yeoman. They had bouts of wrestling and of cudgel play, so that every day they gained in skill and strength. Thus they dwelled for nearly a year, and in that time Robin Hood often turned over in his mind many means of making an even score with the sheriff. At last he began to fret at his confinement, so one day he took up his stout cudgel and set forth to seek adventure, strolling blithely along until he came to the edge of Sherwood Forest. There he rambled along the sunlit road. He met a lusty young butcher driving a fine mare and riding in a stout new cart, all hung about with meat. Merrily whistled the butcher as he jogged along, for he was going to the market, and the day was fresh and sweet, making his heart blithe within him. "Good morrow to thee, jolly fellow," quoth Robin. "Thou seemest happy this merry morn." "Ay, that I am," quoth the jolly butcher, "and why should it not be so? Am I not hale in wind and limb? Have I not the bonniest lass in all Nottinghamshire? And lastly, am I not to be married to her on Thursday, next in sweet Locksley town?" "Ha!" said Robin, "comest thou from Locksley town? Well do I know that fair place for miles about, and well do I know each hedgerow and gentle pebbly stream, and even all the bright little fishes therein, for there I was born and bred. Now where goest thou with thy meat, my fair friend?" "I go to the market at Nottingham town to sell my beef and my mutton," answered the butcher. "But who art thou that cometh from Locksley town?" "A yeoman am I, and my men do call me Robin Hood." "Now, by Our Lady's grace," cried the butcher, Well, I do know thy name, as many a time as I have heard thy deeds both sung and spoken of. But heaven forbid thou should take aught of me. An honest man am I, and I have wronged neither man nor maid. So trouble me not, good master, as I have never troubled thee. Nay, heaven forbid indeed, quoth Robin, that I should take from such as thee, jolly fellow. Not so much as 1 farthing I would take from thee, for I love a fair Saxon face, like thine right well, more especially when it cometh from Locksley town, and most especially when the man that owneth it is to marry a bonny lass on Thursday next. But come, tell me, for what price wilt thou sell me all of thy meat and thy horse and cart? At 4 marks do I value meat, cart, and mare, quoth the butcher. But if I do not sell my meat, I will not have 4 marks in value. And then Robin Hood plucked the purse from his girdle, and quoth he, Here in this purse are 6 marks. Now I would be a fair butcher for this day, and sell my meat in Nottingham town. Wilt thou close a bargain with me, and take 6 marks for thine outfit? Now may the blessings of all the saints fall on thine honest head, cried the butcher right joyfully, as he leaped down from his cart and took the purse that Robin held out to him. Nay, quoth Robin, laughing loudly, many do like me and wish me well, but few call me honest. Now get thee gone and back to thy lass, and give her a sweet kiss for me. So saying, he donned the butcher's apron, and climbing into the cart, he took the reins in his hands and drove off through the forest to Nottingham town. When he came to Nottingham, he entered the part of the market where the butcher stood, and took up his inn in the best place he could find. Next, he opened his stall and spread his meat upon the bench. Then, taking clever and steel and clattering them together, he told aloud in merry tones, Now come ye lasses, and eke ye dames, and buy your meat from me. For 3 pennyworths of meat I sell, for the charge of 1 penny. Lamb I have, and that I have fed upon naught, but the dainty dames pied, and the violet sweet, and the daffodil, they grow in stream beside. And beef have I from heathery words, and mutton from dales all green, and veal as white as maiden's brow, with mother's milk I been. Then come ye lasses, eke ye dames, come buy your meat for me. For 3 pennyworths of meat I sell, for the charge of 1 penny. Thus he sang blithely, while all who stood near listened amazedly. Then, when he had finished, he clattered the steel and cleaver more loudly, shouting lustily, Now who will buy? Who will buy? 4 fixed prices I have. 3 pennyworths of meat I sell to a fat friar or a priest for 6 pence, for I want not their custom. Stout aldermen I charge 3 pence, for it doth not matter to me whether they buy it or not. To buxom dames I sell 3 pennyworths of meat for 1, for I like their custom well. But to the bonny lass that hath a liking for a good tight butcher, I charge not, but 1 fair kiss, for I like her custom best of all. Then all began to stare and wonder, and crowd around, laughing, for never was such selling heard of in all Nottingham town. But when they came to buy it, they found it as he said, for he gave good wife or dame as much meat for 1 penny as they could buy elsewhere for 3. And when a widow or poor woman came to him, he gave her flesh for nothing. But when a merry lass came up to him and gave him a kiss, he charged not 1 penny for his meat. And many such came to his stall, for his eyes were as blue as the skies of June, and he laughed merrily, giving each full measure. Thus he sold his meat so fast that no butcher that stood near him could sell anything. Then they began to talk among themselves, and some said, This must be a thief who has stolen cart, horse, and meat. But others say, Nay, when did you ever see a thief who parted with his goods so freely and merrily? This must be some prodigal who hath sold his father's land, and would fain live merrily while the money lasts. And these latter being being the greater number, the others came round one by one to their way of thinking. Then some of the butchers came to him and made his acquaintance. "Come, brother," quoth one, who was the head of them all. "We be all one trade, so wilt thou go dine with us? For this day the sheriff hath asked all the butcher guild to feast with him in the guild hall. There will be stout fare and much to drink, and that thou likest, or I mistake thee." "Now beshrew his heart," quoth jolly Robin, "that would deny a butcher, and moreover I will go dine with you all, my sweet lads, and that as far as I can hie." Whereupon, having sold all his meat, he closed his stall and went with them to the guild hall. There the sheriff had already come in state, and with him many butchers. When Robin and those that were with him came, all laughing at some merry jest he had been telling, those that were near the sheriff whispered to him, Yon is a right mad blade, for he hath sold more meat in one penny this day than we could sell for 3, and whatsoever merry lass gave him a kiss, he gave meat for naught. And another said, He is some prodigal that hath sold his land for silver and gold, and meaneth to spend all right merrily. The sheriff called Robin to him, not knowing in his butcher's dress, and made him sit close to him upon his right hand, for he loved a rich young prodigal, especially when he thought that he might lighten the prodigal's pockets into his own most worshipful purse. So he made much of Robin, and laughed and talked with him more than with any of the others. And at last the dinner was ready to be served, and the sheriff bade Robin say grace. So Robin stood up and say, Now heaven bless us all, and good meat and good sack within this house, and may all butchers remain as honest men as I am. At this all laughed, the sheriff loudest of all, for he said to himself, Surely this is indeed some prodigal, and perchance I may empty his purse some of the money the fool throweth about so freely. Then he spake aloud to Robin, saying, Thou art a jolly young blade, and I love thee mightily. And he smote Robin upon the shoulder. Then Robin laughed loudly too. Yea, quoth he, I know thou dost love a jolly blade, for thou didst not have jolly Robin Hood at thy shooting match, and didst thou not gladly give him a bright golden arrow of his own? At this the sheriff looked grave, and all the guild butchers too, so that none laughed but Robin. Only some winked slyly at each other. Come, fill us some sack, cried Robin. Let us ever be merry while we may, for a man is but dust, and he hath but a span to live here till the worm getteth him, as our good gossip Swanthold saith. So let life be merry while it lasts, say I. Nay, never look down in the mouth, Sir Sheriff, who knowest thou, but thou mayest catch Robin Hood yet, if thou drinkest less good sack and malmsey, and bring down the fat about the paunch, and dust from out thy brain. Be merry, man. Then the sheriff laughed again, but not as though he had liked the jest, while the butcher said, one to another, Before heaven, never have we seen such a mad rollicking blade. Mayhap, though, he will make the sheriff mad. Now, how now, brothers, cried Robin. Be merry, nay, never count over your farthings, for by this and by that I will pay this shot myself, even though it cost 200 pounds. So let no man draw his lip, nor thrust his finger into his purse, for I swear that neither butcher nor sheriff shall pay 1 penny for this feast. That's where we're going to leave off.
Thank you for reading that for us. And next up, well, you'll just have to wait and see.
Hello again, it's Miss Rebecca. Today I will be reading Chapter 4 of 5 Little Peppers and How They Grew. Trouble for the Little Brown House. Oh, I do wish, said Joel a few mornings after, pushing back his chair and looking discontentedly at his bowl of mush and molasses. I do wish that we could ever have something new besides this everlasting old breakfast. Why can't we, Mammy?" "Better be glad you've got that, Joe," said Mrs. Pepper, taking another cold potato and sprinkling on a little salt. "Folks shouldn't complain as long as they've anything to eat." "But I'm so tired of it. Same old thing," growled Joel. "Seems as if I should turn into a meal bag or a molasses jug." "We'll hand it over then," proposed Ben, who was unusually hungry and had a hard day's work before him. "No," said Joel, alarmed, alarmed at the prospect, and putting in an enormous mouthful. "It's better than nothing." "Oh dear," said little Phronsie, catching Joel's tone. "It isn't nice. No, it isn't." And she put down her spoon so suddenly that the molasses spun off in a big drop that trailed off the corner of the table and made Polly jump up and run for the floor cloth. "Oh, Phronsie," she said reprovingly, "you ought not to." "Never mind, pet," as she caught sight of two big tears trying to make a path in the little molasses-streaked face. "Polly'll wipe it up." "Shan't we ever have anything else to eat, Polly?" asked the child gravely, getting down from her high chair to watch the operation of cleaning the floor. "Oh, yes," said Polly cheerfully, "lots and lots, when our ship comes in." "What'll there be?" asked Phronsie, in the greatest delight, prepared for anything. "Oh, I don't know," said Polly. "Ice cream for one thing, Phronsie, and maybe little cakes." "With pink on top?" interrupted Phronsie, getting down by Polly's side. "Oh, yes," said Polly, warming with her subject. "Ever and ever so much pink, Phronsie Pepper. More than you can eat." Phronsie just clasped her hands and sighed. More than she could eat was beyond her. "Ho!" said Joel, who caught the imaginary bill of fare. "That's nothing, Polly. I'd speak for a plum puddin'." "Like the one Mother made us for Thanksgiving?" asked Polly, getting up and waiting a minute, cloth in hand, for the answer. "Yes, sir," said Joel, shutting one eye and looking up at the ceiling musingly while he smacked his lips in remembrance. "Wasn't that prime, though?" "Yes," said Polly thoughtfully. "Would you have 'em all like that, Joe?" "Every one," replied Joe promptly. "I'd have 75 of 'em." "75 of what?" asked Mrs. Pepper, who had gone into the bedroom and now came out, a coat in hand, to sit down in the west window, where she began to sew rapidly. "Better clear up the dishes, Polly, and set the table back. 75 of what, Joel?" "Plum puddings," said Joel, kissing Phronsie. "Dear me," ejaculated Mrs. Pepper. "You don't know what you're saying, Joel Pepper. The house couldn't hold them." "Wouldn't long," responded Joel. "We'd eat 'em." "That would be foolish," interposed Ben. "I'd have roast beef and fixings and oyster and huckleberry pie." "Oh dear," cried Polly. "How nice, Ben. You always do think of the very best things." But Joel pooh-poohed and declared he wouldn't waste his time over old beef. He'd have something like, and then he cried, "Come on, Dave. What did you choose?" Little Davy had been quietly eating his breakfast amid all this chatter, and somehow, thinking it might make the mother feel badly, he had refrained from saying just how tiresome he had really found this everlasting breakfast, as Joel called it. But now he looked up eagerly, his answer all ready. "Oh, I know," he cried. "Well, what would be the most beautiful would be toasted bread, white bread, and candy." "What's candy?" asked Phronsie. "Oh, don't you know, Phronsie?" cried Polly. "What Mrs. Beebe gave you the day you got your shoes, the pink sticks, and the peppermint stick Mr. Beebe gave you, Phronsie," finished Joel, his mouth watering at the remembrance. "That day when you got your toe pounded," added Davy, looking at Joel. "Oh," cried Phronsie, "I want some now, I do." "Well, Davy," said Polly, "you shall have that for breakfast when our ship comes in, then." "Your ships aren't ever coming," broke in Mrs. Pepper wisely, "if you sit there talking. Folks don't ever make any fortunes by wishing." "True enough," laughed Ben, jumping up and setting back his chair. "Come on, Joe. You've got to pile today." "Oh, dear," said Joel dismally. "I wish Mr. Blodgett's wood was all afire." "Never say that, Joel," said Mrs. Pepper, looking up sternly. "It's biting your own nose off to wish that wood was afire. And besides, it's dreadfully wicked." Joel hung his head, for his mother never spoke in that way unless she was strongly moved. But he soon recovered and hastened off for his jacket. "I'm sorry I can't help you do the dishes, Polly," said David, running after Joel. "I'm going to help her," said Phronsie. "I am." So Polly got the little wooden tub that she always used, gave Phronsie the well-worn cup napkin, and allowed her to wipe the handleless cups and cracked saucers, which afforded the little one intense delight. "Don't you wish, Polly," said little Phronsie, bustling around with a very important air, nearly smothered in the depths of the big brown apron that Polly had carefully tied under her chin, "don't you wish that you didn't ever and ever have so many dishes to do?" Maybe," said Polly thoughtlessly. She was thinking of something else besides cups and saucers just then. She was thinking of how nice it would be to go off for just one day and do exactly as she had a mind to in everything. She even envied Ben and the boys who were going to work hard at Deacon Blodgett's woodpile. "Well, I tell you," said Phronsie confidently, setting down a cup that she had polished with great care, "I'm going to do 'em all tomorrow for you, Polly. I can, truly, let me now." "Polly, do." "Nonsense," said Polly, giving a great splash with her mop in the tub, ashamed of her inward repinings. "Phronsie, you're no bigger than a mouse." "Yes, I am," retorted Phronsie very indignantly. Her face began to get very red, and she straightened up so suddenly to show Polly just how very big she was, that her little head came up against the edge of the tub. Over it went. A pile of saucers followed. "There now," cried Polly. "See what you've done." "Oh," whimpered Phronsie, breaking into a subdued roar. "Oh, Polly, it's all running down my back." "Is it?" said Polly, bursting out into a laugh. "Never mind, Phronsie, I'll dry you." "Dear me, Polly," said Mrs. Pepper, who had looked up in time to see the tub racing along by itself towards the provision room door, a stream of dishwater following in its wake. "She will be wet clear through. Do get off her things quick." "Yes'm," cried Polly, picking up the tub and giving 2 or 3 quick sops to the floor. "Here you are," grasping Phronsie, crying as she was, and carrying her into the bedroom. "Oh dear," wailed the child, still holding the wet dish towel. "I won't ever do it again if you'll only let me do 'em all tomorrow." "When you're big and strong," said Polly, giving her a hug, "you shall do 'em every day." "May I really?" said little Phronsie, blinking through the tears and looking radiant. "Yes, truly, every day." "Then I'll grow right away, I will," said Phronsie, bursting out merrily, and she sat down and pulled off the well-worn shoes, into which a big pool of dishwater had run, while Polly went for dry stockings. "So you shall," said Polly, coming back, a big piece of gingerbread in her hand, "and this'll make you grow, Phronsie. Have some gingerbread." "Oh," said Phronsie's little white teeth, shut down quickly on the comforting morsel. Gingerbread didn't come often enough into the Pepper household to be lightly esteemed. "Now," said Mrs. Pepper, when order was restored, the floor washed up brightly, and every cup and platter in place, hobnobbing away to themselves on the shelves of the old corner cupboard, and Polly had come as usual with needle and thread to help Mother. Polly was getting so that she could do the plain parts on the coats and jackets, which filled her with pride at the very thought. "Now," said Mrs. Pepper, "you needn't help me this morning, Polly. I'm getting on pretty smart, but you may just run down to the parson's and see how he is." "Is he sick?" asked Polly in awe. To have the parson sick was something quite different from an ordinary person's illness. "He's taken with a chill," said Mrs. Pepper, biting off a thread. "So Miss Huldy Folsom told me last night, and I'm afraid he's going to have a fever." "Oh dear," said Polly in dire distress. "Whatever would we do?" "Don't know, I'm sure," replied Mrs. Pepper, setting her stitches firmly. "The Lord'll provide. So you run along, child, and see how he is." "Can't Phronsie go?" asked Polly, pausing halfway to the bedroom door. "Well, yes, I suppose she might," said Mrs. Pepper assentingly. "No, she can't either," said Polly, coming back with her sunbonnet in her hand and shutting the door carefully after her. 'cause she's fast asleep on the floor." "Is she?" said Mrs. Pepper. "Well, she's been running so this morning. She's tired out, I suppose." "And her face is dreadfully red," continued Polly, tying on her bonnet. "Now, what'll I say, Mum?" "Well, I should think 'twould be," said Mrs. Pepper, replying to the first half of Polly's speech. "She cried so." "Well, you just tell Mrs. Henderson your ma wants to know how Mr. Henderson is this morning, and if 'twas a chill he had yesterday, or how he slept last night, and—" "Oh, Ma," said Polly, "I can't ever remember all that." "Oh, yes, you can," said Mrs. Pepper encouragingly. "Just put your mind on it, Polly. 'Tisn't anything to what I used to have to remember when I was a little girl. No bigger than you." Polly sighed, and feeling sure that something must be the matter with her mind, gave her whole attention to the errand, till at last, after a multiplicity of messages and charges, not to forget any one of them, Mrs. Pepper let her depart. Up to the old-fashioned green door, with its brass knocker, Polly went, running over in her mind just which of the messages she ought to give first. She couldn't for her life think whether, if it was "'twas a chill he had yesterday," ought to come before "how he slept." She knocked timidly, hoping Mrs. Henderson would help her out of her difficulty by telling her without the asking. All other front doors in Badgertown were ornaments, only opened on grand occasions, like a wedding or a funeral. But the minister's was accessible alike to all. So Polly let fall the knocker and awaited the answer. A scuffling noise sounded along the passage, and then Polly's soul sank down in dire dismay. It was the minister's sister, and not gentle little Mrs. Henderson. She never could get on with Miss Jerusha in the least. She made her feel as she told her mother once, "It's as if I don't know what my name is." And now here she was, and all those messages. Miss Jerusha unbolted the door, slid back the great bar, opened the upper half, and stood there. She was a big woman, with sharp black eyes and spectacles, over which she looked, which to Polly was much worse, for that gave her 4 eyes. "Well, and what do you want?" she asked. I came to see, my ma sent me," stammered poor Polly. "And who is your ma?" demanded Miss Jerusha, as much like a policeman as anything. "And where do you live?" I live in Primrose Lane," replied Polly, wishing very much that she was back there. "I don't want to know where you live before I know who you are," said Miss Jerusha. "You should answer the question I asked first. Always remember that." "My ma's Mrs. Pepper," said Polly. "Mrs. who?" repeated Miss Jerusha. By this time, Polly was so worn that she came very near turning and fleeing, but she thought of her mother's disappointment in her and the loss of the news, and stood quite still. "What is it, Jerusha?" A gentle voice here broke upon Polly's ear. "I don't know," responded Miss Jerusha tartly, still holding the door, much as if Polly were a robber. "It's a little girl, and I can't make out what she wants." "Why, it's Polly Pepper," explained Mrs. Henderson pleasantly. "Come in, child." She opened the other half of the big door and led the way through the wide hall into a big old-fashioned room with painted floor and high old sideboard and some stiff-backed rocking chairs. Miss Jerusha stalked in also and seated herself by the window and began to knit. Polly had just opened her mouth to tell her errand when the door also opened suddenly and Mr. Henderson walked in. "Oh," said Polly, and then she stopped, and the color flushed up into her face. "What is it, my dear?" said the minister. He took her hand kindly and looked down into her flushed face. "You are not going to have a fever and be sick and die," she cried. "I hope not, my little girl." He smiled back encouragingly, and then Polly gave her messages, which now she managed easily enough. "There," broke in Miss Jerusha. "There, a cat can't sneeze in this town, but everybody'll know it in a quarter of an hour." And then Mrs. Henderson took Polly out to see a brood of new little chicks. They had just popped their heads out into the world. And to Polly, down on her knees, admiring, the time passed very swiftly indeed. "Now I must go, ma'am," she said at last, looking up into the lady's face regretfully. for Mammy didn't say I was to stay. Very well, dear. Do you think you could carry a little pat of butter? I have some very nice my sister sent me, and I want your mother to share it. Oh, thank you, ma'am, cried Polly, thinking. How glad Davy will be, for he does so love butter, only— Wait a bit, then, said Mrs. Henderson, who didn't seem to notice the objection. So she went into the house, and Polly went down again in admiration before the fascinating little puffballs. But she was soon on the way with a little pat of butter in a blue bowl, tied over with a clean cloth. Happy in her gift for Mammy, and in the knowledge of the minister being all well. I wonder if Phronsie's awake, she thought to herself, turning in at the little brown gate. If she is, she shall have a piece of bread with lots of butter. Hush, said Mrs. Pepper, from the rocking chair in the middle of the floor. She had something in her arms. Polly stopped suddenly, almost letting the bowl fall. It's Phronsie, said the mother. And I don't know what the matter is with her. You'll have to go for the doctor, Polly, and just as fast as you can. Polly still stood holding the bowl and staring with all her might. Phronsie sick? Don't wake her up, said Mrs. Pepper. Poor Polly couldn't have stirred to save her life for a whole minute. And then she said, Where shall I go? Oh, run to Dr. Fisher's and don't be gone long. Polly set down the bowl of butter and sped on the wings of the wind for the doctor. Something dreadful was the matter, she felt, for never had a physician been summoned to the Hearty Pepper family since she could remember, only when the father died. Fear lent speed to her feet, and soon the doctor came and bent over poor little Phronsie, who still lay in her mother's arms in a burning fever. It's measles, he pronounced. That's all. No cause for alarm. You ever had it? He asked, turning suddenly around on Polly, who was watching with wide open eyes for the verdict. No, sir, answered Polly, not knowing in the least what measles was. What shall we do? Said Mrs. Pepper. There haven't any of them had it. The doctor was over by the little table under the window, mixing up some black-looking stuff in a tumbler, and he didn't hear her. There, he said, putting a spoonful into Phronsie's mouth. She'll get along well enough. Only keep her out of the cold. Then he pulled out a big silver watch. He was a little thin man, and the watch was immense. Polly, for her life, couldn't keep her eyes off of it. If Ben could only have one so fine. Polly, whispered Mrs. Pepper, run and get my purse. It's in the top bureau drawer. Yes'm, said Polly, taking her eyes off by a violent wrench from the fascinating watch. And she ran quickly and got the old stocking leg, where the hard earnings that stayed long enough to be put anywhere always found refuge. She put it into her mother's lap and watched while Mrs. Pepper counted out slowly $1 in small pieces. Here, sir, she said, holding them out towards the doctor, and thank you for coming. Hey, said the little man, spinning around, that $1's the Lord's. Mrs. Pepper looked up, bewildered, and still sat holding it. And the Lord has given it to you to take care of these children with. See that you do. And without another word, he was gone. Wasn't he good, Mammy? Asked Polly after the first surprise was over. I'm sure he was, said Mrs. Pepper. Well, tie it up again, Polly. Tie it up tight. We shall want it, I'm sure, sighing at her little sick girl. Mayn't I take Phronsie, Ma? Asked Polly. No, said Phronsie. Phronsie had woken up. She had got Mammy, and she meant to improve the privilege. What is measles anyway, Mammy? Asked Polly, sitting down on the floor at their feet. Oh, 'tis something children always have, replied Mrs. Pepper, but I'm sure I hoped it wouldn't come just yet. I shan't have it, said Polly decisively. I shan't have it. I know I shan't. Nor Ben, nor Joe, nor Davy, I guess, she added hesitatingly, for Davy was the delicate one of the family, at least not nearly so strong as the others. Mrs. Pepper looked at her anxiously, but Polly seemed as bright and healthy as ever, as she jumped up and ran to put the kettle on the stove. What'll the boys say, I wonder, she thought to herself, feeling quite important that they really had sickness in the house. As long as Phronsie wasn't dangerous, it seemed quite like rich folks, and she forgot the toil and the grind of poverty. She looked out from time to time as she passed the window, but no boys came. I'll put her in bed, Polly, said Mrs. Pepper in a whisper, as Phronsie closed her eyes again and breathed regularly. And then will you have your dinner, Ma? Yes, said Mrs. Pepper. I don't care if the boys come. The boys will never come, said Polly impatiently. I don't believe. Why? Here. Oh, well, I don't believe. Why? Here they are. Oh, dear, said Joel, coming in crossly. I am so hungry. Oh, butter. Where'd you get that? I thought we never should get it here. I thought so too, said Polly. Hush. Why, where's Ben? He's just back, began Joel, commencing to eat. And Davy, something is the matter with Ben. He says he feels funny. Something the matter with Ben, repeated Polly. She dropped the cup she held, which broke in a dozen pieces. Oh, Whocky, cried Joel. See what you've done, Polly Pepper? But Polly didn't hear. Over the big, flat doorstone she sped and met Ben with little David coming in the gate. His face was just like Phronsie's, and with a cold, heavy feeling at her heart, Polly realized that this was no play. Oh, Ben, she cried, flinging her arms around his neck and bursting into tears. Don't, please. I wish you wouldn't. Phronsie's got him, and that's enough. Got what? Asked Ben, while Davy's eyes grew to their widest proportions. Oh, measles, cried Polly, bursting out afresh. The hatefulest, horridest measles. And now you're taken. Oh, no, I'm not, responded Ben cheerfully, who knew what measles were. Wipe 'em up, Polly. I'm all right. Only my head aches and my eyes feel funny. But Polly, only half reassured, controlled her sobs, and the sorrowful trio repaired to Mother. Oh, dear, ejaculated Mrs. Pepper, sinking in a chair in dismay at sight of Ben's red face. Whatever will we do now? The prop and stay of her life would be taken away if Ben should be laid aside. No more stray half or quarter dollars would come to her out when she didn't know where to turn. Polly cleared off the deserted table. For once, Joel had all the bread and butter he wanted. Ben took some of Phronsie's medicine and crawled up into the loft to bed, and quite settled down on the little household. Polly, whispered Ben as she tucked him in, it'll be hard buckling too for you now, and I guess you'll be able to do it. Next, Chapter 5, More Trouble.
That was great. And next up, we're going to continue with White Fang.
White Fang by Jack London. Part 2, Chapter 2, The Lair. For 2 days, the she-wolf and One Eye hung about the Indian camp. He was worried and apprehensive, yet the camp lured his mate, and she was loath to depart. But when one morning the air was rent with the report of a rifle close at hand and a bullet smashed against a tree trunk several inches from One Eye's head, they hesitated no more, but went off on a long, swinging lope that puts quick miles between them and the danger. They did not go far, a couple of a day's journey. The she-wolf's need to find the thing for which she searched had now become imperative. She was getting very heavy and could run but slowly. Once, in the pursuit of a rabbit, which she ordinarily would have caught with ease, she gave over and lay down and rested. One Eye came to her, but when he touched her neck gently with his muzzle, she snapped at him with such quick fierceness that he tumbled over backward and cut a ridiculous figure in his effort to escape her teeth. Her temper was now shorter than ever, but he had become more patient than ever and more solicitous. And then she found the thing for which she sought. It was a few miles up a small stream that in the summertime flowed into the Mackenzie, but that then was frozen over and frozen down to its rocky bottom, a dead stream of solid white from source to mouth. The she-wolf was trotting wearily along, her mate well in advance, when she came upon the overhanging high clay bank. She turned aside and trotted over to it. The wear and tear of spring storms and melting snows had underwashed the bank, and in one place had made a small cave out of a narrow fissure. She paused at the mouth of the cave and looked the wall over carefully. Then on one side and the other, she ran along the base of the wall to where its abrupt bulk merged from the softer lined landscape. Returning to the cave, she entered its narrow mouth. For a short 3 feet, she was compelled to crouch. Then the walls widened and rose higher to a little round chamber nearly 6 feet in diameter. The roof barely cleared her head. It was dry and cozy. She inspected it with painstaking care while One Eye, who had returned, stood in the entrance and patiently watched her. She dropped her head with her nose to the ground and directed toward a point near to her closely bunched feet, and around this point she circled several times. Then, with a tired sigh that was almost a grunt, she curled her body in, relaxed her legs, and dropped down her head toward the entrance. One Eye, with pointed, interested ears, laughed at her, and beyond outline against the white light, she could see the brush of his tail waving good-naturedly. Her own ears, with a snuggling movement, laid their sharp points backward and down against the head for a moment, while her mouth opened and her tongue lolled peaceably out, and in this way she expressed that she was pleased and satisfied. One Eye was hungry. Though he lay down in the entrance and slept, his sleep was fitful. He kept awaking and cocking his ears at the bright world without, where the April sun was blazing across the snow. When he dozed, upon his ears would steal the faint whispers of hidden trickles of running water, and he would rouse and listen intently. The sun had come back, and all the awakening Northland world was calling to him. Life was stirring. The feel of spring was in the air, the feel of growing life under the snow, the sap ascending in the trees, of buds bursting the shackles of the frost. He cast anxious glances at his mate, but she showed no desire to get up. He looked outside, and half a dozen snowbirds fluttered across his field of vision. He started to get up, then looked back to his mate again and settled down and dozed. A shrill and minute singing stole upon his hearing. Once and twice, he sleepily brushed his nose with his paw. Then he woke up. There, buzzing in the air at the tip of his nose, was a lone mosquito. It was a full-grown mosquito, one that had lain frozen in a dry log all winter and that had now been thawed out by the sun. He could resist the call of the world no longer. Besides, he was hungry. He crawled over to his mate and tried to persuade her to get up, but she only snarled at him, and he walked out alone into the bright sunshine to find the snow surface soft underfoot and the traveling difficult. He went up the frozen bed of the stream where the snow, shaded by the trees, was yet hard and crystalline. He was gone 8 hours, and he came back through the darkness hungrier than when he had started. He had found game, but he had not caught it. He had broken through the melting snow crust and wallowed, while the snowshoe rabbits had skimmed along on top, lightly as ever. He paused at the mouth of the cave with a sudden shock of suspicion. Faint, strange sounds came from within. They were sounds not made by his mate, and yet they were remotely familiar. He bellied cautiously inside and was met by a warning snarl from the she-wolf. This he received without perturbation, though he obeyed it by keeping the distance. But he remained interested in the other sounds, faint, muffled sobbings and slubberings. His mate warned him irritably away, and he curled up and slept in the entrance. When morning came and a dim light pervaded the lair, he again sought after the source of the remotely familiar sounds. There was a new note in his mate's warning snarl. It was a jealous note, and he was very careful in keeping a respectful distance. Nevertheless, he made out, sheltering between her legs against the length of her body, 5 strange little bundles of life, very feeble, very helpless, making tiny, whimpering noises, with eyes that did not open to the light. He was surprised. It was not the first time in his long and successful life that this thing had happened. It had happened many times, yet each time it was as fresh a surprise as ever to him. His mate looked at him anxiously. Every little while she emitted a low growl, and at times when it seemed to her he approached too near, the growl shot up in her throat to a sharp snarl. Of her own experience, she had no memory of the thing happening, but in her instinct, which she which was the experience of all mothers of wolves, there lurked a memory of fathers that had eaten their newborn and helpless progeny. It manifested itself as a fear strong within her that made her prevent One Eye from more closely inspecting the cubs he had fathered. But there was no danger. Old One Eye was feeling the urge of an impulse that was in turn an instinct that had come down to him from all the fathers of wolves. He did not question it nor puzzle over it. It was there in the fiber of his being, and it was the most natural thing in the world that he should obey it by turning his back on his newborn family and by trotting out and away on the meat trail whereby he lived. 5 or 6 miles from the lair, the stream divided, its forks going off among the mountains at a right angle. Here, leading up at the left fork, he came upon a fresh track. He smelled it and found it so recent that he crouched swiftly and looked in the direction in which it disappeared. Then he turned deliberately and took the right fork. The footprint was much larger than the one his own feet made, but he knew that in the wake of such a trail there was little meat for him. Half a mile up the right fork, his quick ears caught the sound of gnawing teeth. He stalked the quarry and found it to be a porcupine, standing upright against a tree and trying his teeth on the bark. One Eye approached carefully, but hopelessly. He knew the breed, though he had never met it so far north before, and never in his long life had a porcupine served him for a meal. But he had long since learned that there was such a thing as chance, or opportunity, and he continued to draw near. There was never any telling what might happen, for with live things, events were somehow always happening differently. The porcupine rolled itself into a ball, radiating long, sharp needles in all directions that defied attack. In his youth, One Eye had once sniffed too near a similar, apparently inert ball of quills and had the tail flick out suddenly in his face. One quill he had carried away in his muzzle, where it had remained for weeks, a rankling flame, until it finally worked out. So he lay down in a comfortable crouching position, his nose fully a foot away and out of the line of the tail. Thus he waited, keeping perfectly quiet. There was no telling. Something might happen. The porcupine might unroll. There might be opportunity for a deft and ripping thrust of paw into the tender, unguarded belly. But at the end of half an hour, he arose, growled wrathfully at the motionless ball, and trotted on. He had waited too often and futilely in the past for porcupines to unroll to waste any more time. He continued up the right fork. The day wore along, and nothing rewarded his hunt. The urge of his awakened instinct of fatherhood was strong upon him. He must find meat. In the afternoon, he blundered upon a ptarmigan. He came out of the thicket and found himself face to face with the slow-witted bird. It was sitting on a log, not a foot beyond the end of his nose. Each saw the other. The bird made a startled rise, but he struck it with his paw and smashed it down to earth, then pounced upon it and caught it in his teeth as it scuttled across the snow, trying to rise in the air again. As his teeth crunched through the tender flesh and fragile bones, he began naturally to eat. Then he remembered, and, turning on the backtrack, started for home, carrying the ptarmigan in his mouth. A mile above the forks, running velvet-footed as was his custom, a gliding shadow that cautiously prospected each new vista of the trail, he came upon later imprints of the large tracks he had discovered in the early morning. As the track led his way, he followed, prepared to meet the maker of it at every turn of the stream. He slid his head around a corner of rock where began an unusually large bend in the stream, and his quick eyes made out something that sent him crouching swiftly down. It was the maker of the track, a large female lynx. She was crouching as he had crouched once that day. In front of her, the tight rolled ball of quills. If he had been a gliding shadow before, he now became the ghost of such a shadow as he crept and circled around and came up well to the leeward of the silent, motionless pair. He lay down in the snow, depositing the ptarmigan beside him, and with his eyes peering through the needles of a low-growing spruce, he watched the play of life before him, the waiting lynx and the waiting porcupine, each intent on life. And, such was the curiousness of game, the way of life for one lay in the eating of the other, the way of life for the other lay in eating not eaten. While old One Eye, the wolf crouching in the covert, played his part too in the game, waiting for some strange freak of chance that might help him on the meat trail, which was his way of life. Half an hour passed, an hour, and nothing happened. The ball of quills might have been a stone for all it moved. The lynx might have been frozen to marble, and old One Eye might have been dead. Yet all three animals were keyed to a tenseness of living that was almost painful, and scarcely ever would it come to them to be more alive than they were then in their seeming petrifaction. One Eye moved slightly and peered forth with an increased eagerness. Something was happening. The porcupine had at last decided that its enemy had gone away. Slowly, cautiously, it was unrolling its ball of impregnable armor. It was agitated by no tremor of anticipation. Slowly, the bristling ball straightened out and lengthened. One Eye, watching, felt a sudden moistness in his mouth and a drooling of saliva, involuntary, excited by the living meat that was spreading itself like a repast before him. Not quite entirely had the porcupine unrolled when it discovered its enemy. In that instant, the lynx struck. The blow was like a flash of light. The paw, with rigid claws curving like talons, shot under the tender belly and came back with a swift, ripping movement. Had the porcupine been entirely unrolled, or had it not discovered its enemy a fraction of a second before the blow had struck, the paw would have escaped unscathed, but a side flick of the tail sank sharp quills into it as it was withdrawn. Everything had happened at once. The blow, the counterblow, the squeal of agony from the porcupine, the big cat's squall of sudden hurt and astonishment. One Eye half arose in his excitement, his ears up, his tail straight out and quivering behind him. The lynx's bad temper got the best of her. She sprang savagely at the thing that had hurt her, but the porcupine, squealing and grunting with disrupted anatomy, trying feebly to roll up into its ball protection, flicked out its tail again, and again the big cat squalled with hurt and astonishment. Then she fell to backing away and sneezing, her nose bristling with quills like a monstrous pincushion. She brushed her nose with her paws, trying to dislodge the fiery darts, thrust into it with the snow and rubbed it against the twigs and branches, and all the time leaping about ahead, sidewise, up and down in a frenzy of pain and fright. She sneezed continually, and her stub of tail was doing its best toward lashing about by giving quick, violent jerks. She quit her antics and quieted down for a long minute. One Eye watched, and even he could not repress a start of involuntary bristling of hair along his back when she suddenly leaped without warning straight up into the air, at the same time emitting a long and most terrible squall. Then she sprang away up the trail, squalling with every leap she made. It was not until her racket had faded away in the distance and died out that One Eye ventured forth. He walked as delicately as though all the snow were carpeted with porcupine quills, erect and ready to pierce the soft pads of his feet. The porcupine met his approach with a furious squealing and clashing of its long teeth. It had managed to roll up into a ball again, but it was not quite the old compact ball. Its muscles were too much torn for that. It had been ripped almost in half, and it was still bleeding profusely. One Eye scooped out mouthfuls of blood-soaked snow and chewed and tasted and swallowed. This served as a relish, and his hunger increased mightily. But he was too old in the world to forget his caution. He waited. He lay down and waited, while the porcupine grated its teeth and uttered grunts and sobs and occasional sharp little squeals. In a little while, One Eye noticed that the quills were drooping and that a great quivering had set up. The quivering came to an end suddenly. There was a final, defiant clash of the long teeth. Then all the quills drooped quite down, and the body relaxed and moved no more. With a nervous, shrinking paw, One Eye stretched out the porcupine to its full length and turned it over on its back. Nothing had happened. It was surely dead. He studied it intently for a moment, then took a careful grip with his teeth and started off down the stream, partly carrying, partly dragging the porcupine, with head turned to the side so as to avoid stepping on the prickly mass. He recollected something, dropped the burden, and trotted back to where he had left the ptarmigan. He did not hesitate a moment. He knew clearly that what was to be done, and this he did by promptly eating the ptarmigan. Then he returned and took up his burden. When he dragged the result of his day's hunt into the cave, the she-wolf inspected it, turned her muzzle to him, and lightly licked him on the neck. But the next instant she was warning him away from the cubs with a snarl that was less harsh than usual and that was more apologetic than menacing. Her instinctive fear of the father of the father of her progeny was toning down. He was behaving as a wolf father should, and manifesting no unholy desire to devour the young lives she had brought into the world.
That was great. You remember this guy? Yes, Dr. Dolittle. And that is what is next up. I'm going to be reading the next few chapters of the story of Dr. Dolittle. Let's get started. Chapter 15, The Barbary Dragon. Everything would have gone all right if the pig had not caught a cold in his head while on the damp sugarcane field on the island. This is what happened. After they had pulled up an anchor without a sound and were moving the ship very, very carefully out of the bay, Gub-Gub suddenly sneezed so loud that the pirates on the other ship came rushing upstairs to see what the noise was. As soon as they saw the doctor was escaping, they sailed their other boat right close to the entrance of the bay so that the doctor could not get out to the open sea. Then the leader of these bad men, who called himself the Dragon of the Barbary Coast, shook his fist at the doctor and shouted across the water, "Ha ha! You are caught, fine friend. You were going to run off in me ship, eh? But you are not good enough sailor to beat the Barbary Dragon. I want that duck you got and that pig too. We'll have pork chops and roast duck for supper tonight. And before I let you go home, you must make your friend send me a trunk full of gold." Poor Gub-Gub began to weep, and Dab-Dab was ready to fly to save her life. But the owl Tutu whispered to the doctor, "Keep him talking, doctor. Be pleasant to him. Our old ship is bound to sink soon. The rats said it would be at the bottom of the sea before tomorrow night, and the rats are never wrong. Be pleasant till the ship sinks under him. Keep him talking. Woo, woo." "Wait until tomorrow night," said the doctor. "We'll do our best. Let me see, what shall I talk about?" "Oh, let them come on," said Jip. "We can fight those dirty rascals. There's only 6 of them. Let them come on. I'd love to tell that collie next door when we get home that I had bitten a real pirate. Let 'em come, let 'em come. We'll fight 'em, we'll fight 'em." "But they have pistols and swords," said the doctor. No, that would never do. I must talk to him. "Look here, Mr. Dragon." But before the doctor could say any more, the pirates began to sail the ship nearer, laughing with glee, "Ha, ha, 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 ha," and saying to one another, "Who shall be the first to catch the pig, to catch the pig?" Poor Gub-Gub was dreadfully frightened, and the push-me-pull-you began to sharpen his horns for a fight by rubbing them on the mast of the ship, while Jip kept springing into the air and barking and calling this dragon fellow bad names in dog language. But presently something seemed to go wrong with the pirates. They stopped laughing and cracking jokes. They looked puzzled. Something was making them uneasy. Then the dragon, staring down at his feet, suddenly bellowed out, "Thunder and lightning, man, the boat is leaking!" And then the other pirates peered over the side and saw that the boat was indeed getting lower and lower and lower into the water. And then one of them said to the dragon, But surely if this old boat were sinking, we'd see the rats leaving it. And Jip shouted across from the other ship, "You great duffers! There are no rats to leave. They left 2 hours ago. To you, my fine friends. But of course, the men did not understand him. Soon, the front end of the ship began to go down and down, faster and faster, till the boat almost looked as though it were standing on its head. And the pirates had to cling to the rails and the masts and the ropes and everything to keep from sliding off. Then the sea rushed in, roaring in through all the windows and the doors. And at last the ship plunged right down to the bottom of the sea, making a dreadful gurgling noise. And the 6 bad men were left bobbing about on the ocean, on the bay. Some of them started to swim to the shore, to the island, while the others came and tried to get on the boat where the doctor was. But Jip kept snapping their noses, so that they were afraid to climb up to the side of the ship. Then suddenly they all cried out, great and loud, "The sharks! The sharks are coming! Let's get on the ship before help! 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 The sharks! The sharks!" And now the doctor could see all over the bay there were big fish swimming swiftly through the water, and one great shark came near the ship, and poking his nose out of the water, he said to the doctor, "Are you John Dolittle, the famous animal doctor?" Yes, that's my name." "Well," said the shark, "we know these pirates are a bad lot, especially that dragon guy. If they're annoying you, we'll gladly eat them up for you, and then there won't be any trouble anymore." "Oh, thank you," said the doctor. "That is really most sensitive and attentive, but I don't think it'll be necessary to eat them. Don't let any of them reach the shore till I tell you. Just keep them swimming about, will you? And please make the dragon swim over here so I may speak to him." So the shark went off and chased Ben Ali, the dragon, over to the doctor. "Listen, Mr. Dragon," said John Dolittle, leaning over the side. "You have been a very bad man, and I understand that you have killed many people. These good sharks have just offered to eat you up for me, and it would indeed be a good thing if the seas were rid of you. But if you will promise to do as I tell you, I will let you go in safety." "Oh, what must I do?" asked the pirate, looking down sideways at the shark, who was smelling his leg under the water. "You must kill no more people," said the doctor. "You must stop stealing, and you must never sink another ship. You must give up being a pirate forever, altogether." "But what shall I do then?" asked the dragon. "How shall I live?" "You and all of your men shall go onto this island and be birdseed farmers," the doctor answered. "You must grow birdseed for the canaries." The Barbary dragon turned pale with anger. "Grow birdseed," he groaned in disgust. "Can't I be a sailor?" "No," said the doctor, "you cannot. You have been a sailor long enough, and sent many stout ships and good men to the bottom of the sea. For the rest of your life, you must be a peaceful farmer. The shark is waiting. Don't waste any more time. Make up your mind." "Thunder and lightning," the dragon muttered. "Birdseed! Then we will be looked down into the water forever." And he looked down and saw the great shark smelling his leg again. Very well, very well, very well. We'll be farmers." "And remember," said the doctor, that if you do not keep your promise, if you start killing and stealing again, I shall hear of it, because the canaries will come and tell me. And be very sure that I will find a way to punish you. For though I may not be able to sail a ship as well as you, so long as these birds and these beasts and these fishes are my friends, I have not anything to be afraid of a pirate at all, even though he calls himself the Dragon of the Barbary. Now go, be a good farmer, and live in peace. Then the doctor turned to the big shark. Waving his hand, he said, "All right, let them swim to the island safely." And that is the end of chapter 15. Moving on, we are going to get to chapter 16. So this is the 16th chapter, Tutu the Listener. Having thanked the sharks again for their kindness, the doctor and his pets set off once more on their journey home in this swift ship with 3 red sails. As they moved out into the open sea, the animals all went downstairs to see what their new boat was like inside, while the doctor leant on the rail at the back of the ship with his pipe in his mouth, watching the Canary Islands fade away in the blue dusk of the evening. While he was standing there, wondering how the monkeys were getting on and what his garden would look like when he got back to Puddleby, Dab-Dab came tumbling up the stairs, all smiles and full of news. "Doctor, doctor," she cried, "the ship of pirates is beautiful, absolutely. The beds downstairs are made of primrose silk. Hundreds of big pillows and cushions. There are thick, soft carpets on the floors, and the dishes are made of silver. And there are all sorts of things to eat and to drink, special things. The larder, well, it's just like a shop. Oh, that's all. You never saw anything like it in your life. Just think, they've kept 5 different kinds of sardines. Those men! Come and look. Oh, and we found a little room down there with the door that's locked. And we're all crazy to get inside and see what's inside. Jip says it must be the pirates kept their treasure, but we can't open the door. Come down and we'll see if you can let us in." So the doctor went downstairs, and he saw that it was indeed a beautiful ship. He found the animals gathered round that little door, all talking at once, trying to guess what was inside. The doctor turned the handle, but it wouldn't open. Then they all started to hunt for the key. They looked under the mat, they looked under the carpets, they looked in all the cupboards, the drawers, the lockers, in the big chests, in the ship's dining room. They looked everywhere. While they were doing this, they discovered a lot of new and very wonderful things that the pirates must have stolen from other ships. Cashmere shawls as thin as cobwebs, embroidered with flowers of gold, jars of fine tobacco from Jamaica, carved ivory boxes full of Russian tea, an old violin with the string broken, and a picture on the back, a set of big chessmen carved out of coral and amber, a walking stick which had a sword inside it when you pulled out the handle, 6 wine glasses with turquoise and silver round the rims, and a lovely great sugar bowl made of mother of pearl. But nowhere in the whole boat could they find the key that fit into that lock. So they all came back to the door, and Jip peered through the keyhole, but something had been stood against the wall on the inside, and he could see nothing. While they were standing around wondering what they should do, the owl Tutu suddenly said, "Shh! Listen! I do believe there's someone in there." They all kept still for a moment. Then the doctor said, "You must be mistaken, Tutu. I don't hear anything." "I'm sure of it," said the owl. "Shh, there it is again. Do you hear that?" No, I do not," said the doctor. "What kind of sound is it?" "I hear the noise of someone putting his hand in his pocket," said the owl. "But that makes hardly any sense at all," said the doctor. "You couldn't hear that out here." "Pardon me, but I can," said Tutu. "I tell you there is someone on the other side of that door putting his hand in a pocket, and almost everything makes some noise, if you have ears only as sharp enough to catch it. Bats can hear a mole walking in his tunnel underneath the earth, and they all think they're good hearers. But we owls can tell you, using only one ear, the color of a kitten from the way it winks in the dark." Well, said the doctor, "you surprise me. That's very interesting. Listen again and tell me what he's doing." "I'm not sure yet," said Tutu. "If it's a man at all. Maybe it's a woman. Lift me up and let me listen to the keyhole, and I'll tell you soon." So the doctor lifted the owl up and held him close to the lock of the door. After a moment, Tutu said, "Now he's rubbing his face with his left hand. It's a small hand and a small face. It might be a woman. No. Now he's pushing his hair away from his forehead. It's a man, all right." "Women sometimes do that," said the doctor. "True," said the owl, "but when they do, their long hair makes quite a different sound. Shh, shh, shh. Make Fidgety Pig keep still. Now, all of you hold your breath a moment so I can listen well. This is very difficult, what I'm doing right now, and this pesky door is so thick. Shh, shh. Everybody quite still. Shut your eyes and don't breathe." Tutu leaned down and listened again, very hard and very long. At last, he looked up into the doctor's face and said, "The man in there is very unhappy. He weeps. He has taken care not to blubber or sniffle, lest we should find out that he is crying. But I heard, quite distinctly, the sound of a tear falling on his sleeve." "How do you know it wasn't a droplet of water falling off the ceiling?" said the doctor. "Pshaw! Such ignorance," sniffed Tutu. "A drop of water falling from the ceiling would have made 10 times the noise." "Well," said the doctor, "if the poor fellow's unhappy, we've got to get in and see what's the matter with him. Find me an axe. I'll chop the door down." And that is the end of chapter 16. What's going to happen in chapter 17? Wait and see. I bet you thought I left my library completely. Well, I haven't. But that's all the time we have today, everybody, and I hope you enjoyed Story Hour. And please join us again for our next broadcast, and we're going to continue with these chapter books until we're finished reading them all. So, until next time, keep reading.